Once there was a king whose worrisome thoughts swirled around his head like a storm. He feared that his armies would lose battles. He fretted that his treasury would run dry. And he suspected that his ministers would betray him. He had no peace. One day he sat at the top of his castle and looked over the wall at the marketplace, and he wondered, how do common people find happiness? He wished he could be a bird and fly above them and listen to their common conversations. He wondered if they worried as much as he did. And then he had a bright idea. He called forth his servant and asked for the crudest cloth. He asked for his royal seamstress to make up a suit of rags and a hooded cloak. And when they gave them to him, he told them to go away. He carefully took off his crown and dressed himself in the rags and stood in the mirror. He smudged his face with ash and he smiled. He truly did look like a bear. Pleased with his disguise, he crept out of the castle. Even the soldiers didn't recognize him. He spent the whole day walking through the bazaar and the crowds of people, listening to their common talk, enjoying himself with common food. It was almost nightfall as he was walking at the edge of the city, and he noticed a run-down cottage. He peeked in through the window and he saw a man in a small, poor house eating a loaf of bread. But his smile lit up the whole room. He wondered, how is this man so happy? As he looked around his humble surroundings, his curiosity got the better of him, and he knocked on the door. The poor man opened the door, and the king bowed his head, and in his humblest voice said, I am a poor beggar, and would you have some food that I could share? Certainly, said the poor man. Come in. You are a blessing, and I don't have much, but whatever I do have is yours. He cut the bread and shared it with the king. As the king took it, he noticed that the poor man was eating it with such joy, like it was the finest meal he'd ever eaten. He said, why are you so happy? The poor man replied, I've had a good day. Today I earned as much as I needed to buy a loaf of bread. I am a cobbler and I mend shoes. It was a good day today. The king said, but what if you don't earn your bread tomorrow? The poor man looked into the king's eyes, and he saw his furrowed brow and the worry that stained it. And he said, day by day I have faith that all will be well. The king mused over these thoughts, and he said to himself, this man finds happiness in his faith, but he's naive. I will put him to the test. And as he walked out of the cottage, he came up with a plan. The next day, the cobbler went to the market, and as he went to find somebody to mend their shoes, he noticed that there was a huge sign in the marketplace with a royal decree. It said, hear ye, henceforth it is illegal to repair shoes. From now on, if your shoes be torn or worn, you must buy new ones by royal decree of the king. Oh, he thought, and he pondered his situation as he looked around the marketplace. He noticed an old woman carrying a heavy bucket of water from the well. He quickly raced to her and said, please, let me help you. And he put it on his back. For his trouble, the kind woman gave him a coin. With the coin in his hand, his faith grew bright. All day he carried water for people up and back. And by nightfall he had enough to buy his meal. Curious to see how his new friend had gone, the king went to the friend's house and he knocked on the door. The poor man opened the door. And to his surprise, the king saw that his table was laden with not only bread, but a glass of wine. "Come in," said the poor man. "Eat, be merry with me." The king said, "But how did you buy your meal today? I saw the king's decree. Surely you did not cobble shoes." "I certainly did not," said the poor man. "I carried water for people all day. And you see, the loss of my old profession made way for my new. And I made more money today than I ever have before. And I was able to buy more." The king thought to himself and was befuddled by the man's faith. And he thought, "I will test him harder. Surely he has not come upon hard times." The next day, the poor man went to the well, and there was a new law. It now stated it is illegal to carry water for anyone. Thought the poor man, and he looked around the marketplace. He saw a woodcutter carrying wood upon his back. And he went up to him quickly and said, "Excuse me, sir, may I help you? Do you need an assistant to carry wood?" "Certainly," said the man. "Come forth, be with us." All day the poor man cut wood and carried it on his back to the marketplace. And by the end of the day, he earned even more money for his meal. That night, he bought cheese, bread, and wine. The king, chuckling to himself as he came, dressed in his beggar's clothes, knocked on the door. Opening the door, the poor man said, "Come in, please join me in this feast." The king was bewildered. What could he have done? He said, "Sir, how did you afford this feast?" The poor man told him of his story and how he'd become a woodcutter. He said, "But surely, what would you do if tomorrow you could not earn your keep? Surely you would feel the worry for the future that I have in my heart." The poor man looked at the king in his eyes and he said, "Day by day I have faith. All will be well. And as you can see, things are getting better all the time." The king left the cottage and thought, "I have to be more clever." And he came up with a plan. The next day the poor man went to where the woodcutters were, and to his surprise he found the woodcutters were surrounded by the king's men. And the captain of the guard said, "By royal decree, all woodcutters must now report to the palace to be king's guards at the gate." And the poor man was taken away with the rest of them. He was dressed in stiff, colourful clothes and given a sword in its sheath to be held by his side for the day as he held his stance at the gate. At the end of the day, he went to the captain of the guard and asked for his pay so he could buy his meal. But the guard curtly said, "King's men do not get paid for 1 month." He sighed. What shall he do, he thought, as he walked home. He passed by a pawn shop and he thought to himself, He walked in and he presented the steel of the guard's sword and he gave the steel for 1 month's money, enough to buy food. He thought to himself, after this month, I'll have enough money to buy it back. And in the meantime, I'll make a wooden one and place it back in the sheath. This will do. He went home and he prepared a most beautiful meal. And surely enough, the king came back in his ragged clothes, sure that this time he had wavered the man's faith. But looking in through the window, he could not believe his eyes. There was a feast laid out on the table. He knocked on the door, and the poor man opened his room with a smile and said, "Please come in, be my guest." He sat down and said, "Surely, how did you earn enough to buy this feast?" And the man told him that he'd become a king's soldier. And he went on to say that even though they don't get paid for 1 month, he was clever enough to sell the steel to the pawn shop, and by the end of the month he would buy it back again. And not knowing that who sat in front of him was the king, he went on to show the king the wooden sword that he'd begun to carve. The king said, "You are not so wise. What happens if tomorrow you have to draw your sword?" Once again, he looked into the king's eyes and said, "All will be well. I have faith." The next day, the poor man was standing at the king's palace gate. At once, the captain's guard was pulling along a man, and a huge crowd was following him. The captain of the guard came up to the poor man and said, "You there, guard, come forth. This man is a thief. He has stolen a melon, and the king has ordered that you cut off his head." The poor man paused for a moment to consider his predicament. If I pull out my sword, I too will be beheaded, he thought. What to do? The poor man had an idea, and he raised his hand and he said, "Blessed be the Most High. If this man be guilty, give me courage to do what the king has decreed. But if this man be innocent, may the sword in my sheath be turned to wood." And he drew his sword and threw it high into the sky. The gasp went through the crowd. "It's a miracle," they said. The wood sword held high. The man was let free. And at that moment, the king stepped forth from the crowd. He came up to the poor man and he said, "Do you recognize me?" "I do," said the poor man. "You are the king." "Look closer," said the king, "for I am the beggar who has sat at your table and eaten with you night after night." The poor man looked at the man's furrow and surely did recognize him. A smile grew across his face. "I do recognize you," he said. And too, a smile grew across the king's face. He said, "You, sir, are a clever man, and you shall sit with me and dine with me night after night. For you and your faith will help shield me from the fear that I fear of the future." And so it came to pass that the man who had very little but was rich in faith, became the adviser and the wise man that sat beside the king.